So I'd just like to talk about the philosophy as to the limits that we have in Western society to freedom of speech. So the issue with freedom of speech is something that's been over the last few months, maybe the last year or two, has been something that's been gaining more and more momentum as tensions are building up in the Western world right now, along lines of politics, political division, um, or religion, and also public feeling about certain situations that are going on in the world right now. So there are concerns that the government is progressively curtailing our and limiting our freedoms when it comes to freedom of speech. Look at the Lucy Connolly incident of 2024, and you'll see what I mean. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then Google a name. So, but there's almost like an inference that at the same time that before all this started happening, um, then we had absolute freedom of speech, and we never have really in practice. Um, there are always consequences to what we say. Um, it's slightly different in the United States because they have the First Amendment, so the right to freedom of speech is enshrined in law. Um, and in particular, that is why there is such a strong feeling about it. Uh, Not so much, I think, in this country or the rest of Europe. Um, so obviously we have hate speech laws, but even if you took away that and you made it legally, people were legally able to have freedom of speech. It wouldn't take away the fact that we have libel laws and slander laws. So I can't criticize someone or make up lies about someone, if it then affects their business or their personal reputation or character, particularly if they were, say, an actor or a politician, so their reputation kind of comes with the job, and would affect their popularity. I can't say anything like that without there being consequences. Similarly, there are limits to what I can say on here, on YouTube, and other social media platforms. I mean, I would be, and anyone is prevented from saying exactly what they think, or there are limitations imposed on that. Because then on YouTube, that person could face, if not a telling off, then a strike, and if in worst case scenario, they could have their entire YouTube channel removed. Um, Also, um, as we have seen, people with cancel culture, people have been fired from the jobs for saying things on social media, um, for saying things which their employers don't agree with. Um, and we see that more and more all the time that employers are becoming ever more, and businesses are becoming ever more politicized, which then makes this practice seems to have increased more over time. So I think there's always going to be limits to freedom of speech. Now, could we have a society in which there ever could be absolute freedom of speech? I very much doubt it because, as I say, there's always consequences to what people say. The reason that our government currently, and other governments create these limitations to freedom of speech, um, in the form of hate speech laws, is to prevent civil unrest. Because if people were allowed to say what they thought, given the rising tensions in society, um, then it would lead to civil unrest between social, racial, and ethnic groups. Um, And, nobody wants to see that, particularly the government, because what would happen if that happened, then, public buildings, public property could get destroyed, resources have to be employed, obviously the police, but also ambulance crews, fire engines even, if buildings got set alight. So there's always I mean, this is why they do it. So, it's not necessarily a sinister 1984 thing. There's a practical reality as to why they're doing it. Um, but um, I can't see a scenario where we would never have a totalitarian state with zero freedom of speech. Although there are places in the world that we know of that do have that, or more so they have that. We are pretty lucky in the Western world to have relative freedom of speech compared to other countries that I could mention. Um, so, but can we ever have a society where there's um, absolute freedom of speech? No, I think there's always going to be a situation where the line has to be drawn between those two poles. Um, and it's just a question of where that line's drawn. And that line has shifted in maybe at least the last few months, if not the last few years, more towards less freedom of speech. But also, whatever point we are in history also determines what's acceptable and what isn't. And I've seen this during the course of my lifetime. So, what was acceptable to show on TV and what was unacceptable to show on TV when I was a kid is very different to what is acceptable now. So, for example, swearing and bad language is more tolerated now and more acceptable, should I say, than it was when I was a kid. But to kind of like make fun of certain protect groups with protected characteristics, that's very much discouraged or prohibited now in a way that it wasn't when I was a kid, when you had the days of the stand-up comedians that could make jokes about anyone they liked and everyone would laugh. But it's not like that now. The world's changed. Um, so I don't think we can ever have absolute freedom of speech. And what's acceptable and what isn't changes over time, and it probably always will be like that.